Ideally, what we want to come out of this meeting with this morning is, let's call it a set of principles which define what responsible native advertising should look like. So that as we go forward and we drive the message from both the publisher side, from the brand side, from the agency side, we can be clear that there's an approach to take which, if we follow those principles, enables native advertising to work really effectively for everybody. Tom Pepper, MD of Vibrant, and of course many thanks to Vibrant.
Native advertising is about achieving the right balance of seamlessness and with sincerity. And I think those two things go together and fit into our title here. If there was going to be an underlined word there, it would be responsible. What do you think native advertising is?
It's often creating content within the look and feel of the destination you're going to be on, but I think it's actually moved much more into sort of within the stream of advertising now, and having the same relevance as the article or image.
Or does definition ultimately not matter all that much?
The major disagreement is when you start thinking about native as what happens on Facebook and Twitter, because that's almost a format. And then when you start talking about it being enriched content as opposed to a format. Yeah. And so it's almost, is it a glammed up advertorial or is it a new format? And that's where the debate comes in. And it is around this definition.
Anything that's produced for a client with regards to a pitch or a proposal or a RFP has to have full editorial insight from the very start. So the way we work is that as soon as the nuggets of an idea starts, there's a meeting with all key personnel, including publishers, including editorial, including the editor-in-chief even. And if an idea, whether it's client-led or bespoke from a pitch perspective, if it's not got editorial relevance and it can't get natural audience traction, then it's dismissed pretty quickly, because how can we as a publisher offer a worthwhile advertising solution if it doesn't have natural traction with our audience?
Is it born out of desperation that publishers will do almost anything, almost, I emphasise almost, to get money through these doors in difficult times?
Publishers do need to look to other ways to monetize their content and to generate similar revenues to what they have been doing. One of those is native, so I don't think it's any coincidence that this rise has been in line with the rise of programmatic.
We need to attract more clients and revenue onto the digital side, therefore we will work very closely with the editorial staff, and then that seems to have seeped through to the print publications. So now editorial are involved with every single pitch that we do, and we make sure that all our native advertising fits in really well with the brand.
We have a custom content team that write all custom content for clients that's used in native advertising or on the client's own site. So we do keep it very separate. They're often ex-journalists, so sometimes they do have that cachet of the journalism, but they aren't actually on the editorial team.
I'm an editor of The Debrief, which we have native advertising as our primary means of funding. Editorial integrity is very important to me, but I see journalism as protecting your reader and having your reader at the forefront of everything that you do. So I actually, controversially, quite like being involved in the commercial deals and in the native deals, because it gives me a certain sense of control to make sure that we're working with like-minded partners who share our brand values, who understand that we know how to talk to our reader. If you work on a native deal with someone who doesn't share your brand values, that's only going to antagonise your reader and drive them away from your brand.
If there is too much native advertising and not enough editorial, then I think that would annoy the user, and they go to a certain site for content. So that content is what they want to see, what they want to read, what they want to look at.
Regardless of how you feel about the BuzzFeed model, I think for its audience, I think that kind of approach works. It's very bite-sized, It's very light.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about the destination of a native ad at the moment, that's more advertorial style or content-driven, versus where we're seeing the big change and where the scalability is coming is actually integrated into your news feed.
There are two models really that we see emerging. The first is very hard to replicate, and that's really where you're creating content for brands where, ideally if you take the logo away from that, it still works. It still feels very much conducive to the experience. It adds value. A brand is enhancing the user's visit and the user's expectation. And that's kind of stuff that, I mean, I'm at Hearst in the magazine industry. We've kind of been doing that for ages, but I think somebody said earlier on that invariably in the old world of advertorials, the advertiser was kind of in control of that conversation. And I think this whole part of the kind of native industry is really where there's a much finer balance between editorial, between tone of voice, and between a brand's objectives. So whether or not you can do groundbreaking journalism with native, I think it's very, very hard to do. And obviously a brand and an advertiser has objectives and wants to be seen and wants to be noticed and wants impact and wants cut through. It's very, very hard to find that balance. It can be found, but it's very hard to find it. And you have to concede a degree of control at both sides of the fence in order to get that balance right. We have to strike the balance between delivering the necessary traction, volume, impact for a brand, but at the same time, creating an experience for our users.
It's about proportion, and it's about working with like-minded clients and believing that those clients share your brand values. And I think, those tensions that you talk about, those aren't new. Journalists and editors have been facing those tensions on print titles for decades. So I think it's just a new way of framing that conversation.
I don't know why it's thrown the industry into such a sort of these sort of schisms that we don't understand, that just doing good stuff is better than doing bad stuff, and understanding why people go to the site shouldn't be a kind of prohibitive of meeting our objectives in the context, and everyone should be happy. At the moment, it feels like we act as the sort of intermediary between the creative and content, and because we're just the sort of hairy-knuckled buyers, that we don't really have an input on what the creative looks like.
Is actually that notion that the consumer wants more from its advertisers now. They want content from them. They want something that's much more utility-based, entertainment-based, something that has sort of information on it. And that doesn't lend itself to those big pillar campaigns anymore. It lends itself much more to always-on, sort of more contextually relevant type of advertising, if I put it that way, that is discovered. And that's a big challenge we're seeing from our brands and some of our customers.
People only read about what they're interested in, and sometimes that's an ad. I think it then comes down far more to the positioning of that content. And it isn't just a straightforward ad somewhere. You have to create new spaces within a site that aren't offensive to our users, because at the end of the day, the user has to come first.
How do you define responsible, and what if anything, needs to change?
Well, but again, it's about signposting, but it's also about, and I think coming back to the point why publishers are sensitive about it, is that if you want to get very, very integrated with publishing brands, there's a lot of trust that we have with our users, readers of those brands, and it's really important that we don't betray that trust and break it. And actually, if it's done well, it becomes a win-win-win.
So it was in a blue border. Is a blue border enough? Do you notice the blue border? And there is another extreme, which is a great big bang sticker that says this is sponsored content. So there's this line between a blue border and an overt statement. Or they would argue the blue border defines it, but actually, from, let's say, Ofcom or the Advertising Standards Authority, would they agree with that? What do you think? Where do you draw the line between signposting and not really signposting?
Native has become a really hot topic because of the mobile phone. It's a lot easier.
We haven't had enough about mobile.
Yeah, and it's a very nice way to sort of get your brand advertisement out on the mobile phone. I come back to the Facebook and the Twitter notion. They really sort of redefined that notion of in-stream advertising last year, and getting contextually relevant sort of content within your feed that basically is the only ad, in inverted commas, that appears in front of you. And this is, and it's well signposted. And as an advertiser, you want it to be well signposted.
There should be no issue with labelling an ad, as long as it's relevant, as long as it's of use and it's of a sufficient standard. And the opportunity around native is to create something genuinely relevant and interesting.
Back to the creators
What's
again.
the issue with the labelling an ad? We've actually done some testing on our new mobile site. We're actually labelling ads as ads, and they've actually improved response rates. There shouldn't be an issue around labelling if the content is relevant and of interest to the user, I don't think.
Different publishers have different viewpoints on what is a priority. Is it revenue as the priority, or is it creating content that will enhance the user's journey and experience when they're on the site? So they're the two differences. If we're talking native advertising, it has to sit within the context of the page and the content that's on that page, and it has to be a good user experience. If it's not, will sell them advertising.
The biggest challenge actually as a publisher is being able to produce something that delivers the results for the advertiser that they want, because native in this context is kind of a brand solution, but we're looking at response metrics, and I think that's the biggest challenge. So ultimately, I think as publishers, we're going to end up producing really expensive content that isn't worth what we're charging for it, and we're not working at any reasonable margin because there's this performance metric behind it, and we're having to invest in a lot of the distribution model to drive the traffic to get the response that we need for the advertisers, and I think that's the real challenge.
I think with regards to labelling, it doesn't matter whether it's a digital format or it's print, you need to maintain that trust with your readers, and if you don't label something as advertising, whether it's native or not, I think you put that trust in jeopardy a little bit, because people still want to know whether they're being sold to or not, whether it's perfectly in keeping with the brand's values or not. You still want to know.
The sort of one sentence takeaway from your perspective of the sort of things we've been discussing today.
I think it's about being conscious of your responsibility to the user, to your reader, and why they're coming there. You know, we're there to entertain and interest them and not let them down.
It's really working with the editorial team to be able to get this sort of level sort of playing
Sounds
field.
like you've...
It's about being credible and transparent with the content that you're creating, and as everyone said, ultimate responsibility to your reader, really, and making sure that you're producing content that genuinely adds value to that reader.
Readers really don't mind, I don't think, if it's relevant quality content, and you can get to those readers using data and using audience segments to make sure that you are giving the relevant data to not just to the broad audience but to a targeted audience.
Two summary points. One is about objectives, one is about signposting. I think signposting is a really important thing. I think going back to the ad choices thing, we all freaked out about it 2 years ago, and now it's fine. But Justin's point about there being loads of people on the internet who are making money out of sort of nefarious ways, it does make it more respectable if it's well signposted. I think there's a big job to be done to educate clients about what native's going to do for them.
I think transparency is important. So signposting, the user needs to know that it is advertising, and I think the content needs to be relevant within the context of the content of the page for the user as well. So it has to make sense. It has to be, sit within the page as part of being relevant to what the user is on there looking at doing at that time.
Really about understanding why a client wants to use native as a format above and beyond traditional content means, and what the clear KPIs are for what they expect from that content.
This is something positive for all of the industry, that we are entering a new era of collaboration. There are problems of definition and argy-bargy between different sides from the journalist, but that I've heard no problem today that cannot be solved with a little bit of thought and a little bit of understanding and a little bit of flexibility.